I'm a teacher, and now I'm going to sell my students to human traffickers. In the taxi on the outskirts of town, the boy with the red car school bag on his back looked up at me and said innocently, "Teacher, is the world dark or bright?" I smiled and gently rubbed his hair. The world is always evil and dark. In an hour, I would sell this 6-year-old boy James to a human trafficker for 100,000 wrong. At the end of this car ride was a dilapidated factory building. There was a man with a red dragon tattoo on his arm in the house. He was an intermediary who specialized in collecting children. Everyone in that dirty circle knew that the children received by the man with the flower arm were the most beautiful and from the most decent families. So, the price was the highest when they were sold. After selling James, the trafficker said that I would get a 10 commission. I exhaled softly, feeling a little anticipation. This 10 commission is much easier to earn than the money I worked so hard to earn as a teacher in a small town. I am James' art teacher, giving him one-on-one lessons every Saturday. The art institution and I and James' parents are all in the same community. Every time James goes to the institution for class, he is alone. Therefore, in this old community, without surveillance, everyone must think that James was abducted by human traffickers when he was walking alone in the community after class. In this world, the safest place is most likely the most dangerous place. Similarly, the seemingly safest people may be the most dangerous. After James is sold, absolutely no one will suspect me. After all, I am a teacher with a decent identity and would never do the work of a disgraceful human trafficker. In the taxi, I told James that we were going sketching. James is a child of few words. He was wearing a small shirt, looked very cool, his hands in his pockets, looking like a little adult. Soon we arrived at our destination, a white house on the outskirts of town that looked rickety, with a big demolition written on it. This was the place where the famous human trafficker in the circle asked me to meet him. The red seed flowers, all over the mountains and plains, covered the dirt road under my feet. I crouched down and asked James, with a smile, "Isn't it beautiful here?" "It's full of rapeseed flowers." James nodded without speaking. I held his little hand tightly. His hands were freezing cold. Before we could reach the door, it was opened by a pair of hands with flower arms. I knew that from the moment I got out of the car, our every move was being closely watched. I can't turn back. The tall man with the flower arm, holding a cigarette in his mouth, snorted at me, "Come in." I smiled at James. "Shall we go in?" James still didn't speak. He just squeezed my hand tighter. Oh, he's such an obedient child. Walking into the factory, it was empty and dilapidated, with 2 chairs and nothing else. There were 2 other men standing in the house, one fat and one thin, all unshaven, smelling bad, and one of them was holding a ball of nylon rope in his hand. The 2 men looked at me and grinned at me. I felt a twinge of fear. The dilapidated iron door of the factory was slammed shut with a dull thud. James suddenly squeezed me and he said, "Teacher, I want to go back." The human trafficker dropped his half-smoked cigarette. He looked at me with a half-smile and suddenly said, "Teacher, you are something a model teacher." I smiled. "Give me the money. Money and goods are clear. If you are happy, there will be opportunities for cooperation in the future." The trafficker stared at me and burst into an exaggerated laugh. "Ha ha ha ha." I looked a little horrified, but I still laughed with him. James looked at us, laughing. He even hooked the corner of his mouth and laughed. He had a dimple on the corner of his mouth when he smiled, which I always thought was cute, but now I just thought he was stupid. What a stupid kid. The next moment, the fat man with the nylon rope suddenly approached us. He abruptly separated me and James. Then he quickly and violently tied my hands with the rope. The man with the flower on dialed a phone call. He sneered at me and spoke to the person on the phone. "Lisa, they are here. I have tied up the teacher. Well, the money is ready. You come and pick up your son." Then he put down the phone, turned his head, and used his PHS to pick up my chin. Slowly said, "Do you know? We make more money selling women than selling children." The fat man tied me up. He stank. I was very flustered, but I was still ridiculously holding my breath. James shrank in the corner, head down, hands in his pockets, motionless. The traffickers started playing poker. I was tied to the chair the whole time. My hands were rubbed raw by the rough rope. "Hey, untie me." I frowned and said to the flower-armed man in a commanding tone. The flower-armed man lit another cigarette, shrugged, and shook his head at me. I sighed and leaned back in my chair. "Lady, you are really dedicated." After waiting for a long time, I heard footsteps. The flower-armed man stood up quickly and went to the door to look at the peephole. "They are here." The fat man and the thin man looked very excited and stood up almost at the same time. The thin man rolled his eyes. "She's alone." The flower-armed man said, "Well, it's just Lisa." The door opened and I saw Lisa, Jane's mother, her eyes red, rushing in her high heels. She saw her precious son at first sight. She rushed to hug James, tears quickly streaming down. "Son, are you hurt? Are you scared?" "It's all Mom's fault. It's all Mom's fault." James did not say a word. He just stood there motionless like a fool. "Stop sulking with Mom." Lisa turned her head and glared at me fiercely. Mom knew that the vixen was not a good thing. We will never see her again. Go back with Mom. This vicious woman. I rolled my eyes at her. "Bitch." Lisa suddenly rushed over and slapped me hard. My head snapped to the side instantly. There was a burning pain on my face, but I bit my lip hard and did not show weakness. So she gave me another hard slap. Ha ha ha. The three human traffickers in the room, like one, clutched their stomachs and laughed exaggeratedly. "You are so stupid and cheap." Lisa ignored the traffickers and slapped me repeatedly. "Seducing my husband and want to abduct and sell my son. Bitch, I will make you live a life worse than death for the rest of your life." My face was stuck high and swollen. My mouth also began to bleed. Dog. Lug landed on my clothes. I took a deeper leap and sneered, "Husband, do you really think of him as your husband?" Lisa stopped and stared at me. "What do you mean?" I spat out a mouthful of blood, but my mouth was still full of blood. "Lisa, you have more than one man outside. You wish your husband would find more vixens to play with. Don't bother you, right?" The flower-armed man looked at the two of us with his head tilted, twirling a cigarette in his hand, as if watching a play. I ignored him, thinking only of bringing Lisa down. "Tell me you say it." "Well, say it out loud." "Lisa, first glanced back at her son, then pinched my chin sharply, and said word by word through gritted teeth, "You are right, because if you don't speak again, you will have no chance to speak except to yell at men." I smiled softly, without a cry, thanking for mercy. Maybe my expression didn't live up to her expectations. Lisa was ashamed and angry, and slapped me again. "Goodbye, bitch." After the heavy slaps, she turned to pull James' hand and turned to leave, but the door had slammed shut. Lisa froze for a moment, then looked at the trafficker belatedly. The flower-armed man didn't speak. He kept turning the cigarette. "Why did you lock the door?" Lisa's triumphant look quickly collapsed. She quickly approached the door, grabbed the doorknob with both hands, and pulled like crazy, opened the door quickly. The flower-armed man finally dropped his cigarette. He slowly approached Lisa and winked to the thin man. The thin man rubbed his hands and kicked the thin Lisa to the ground. Lisa fell to the ground with a scream. No. But the next second, her hands were tied behind her back. Her son, James, shrank back into the corner in fear. Lisa sat on another empty chair. "Let me go." She kept screaming like crazy, but no one paid any attention to her. The flower-armed man was annoyed, so he stuffed a roll of pink banknotes from the bag into her mouth. Lisa's tears and saliva flowed down together. I laughed so hard that tears came out. I never thought of selling James from the beginning to the end. What a well-behaved and beautiful little boy James is. He was always obedient and listened to me, and his watercolors were also very good. Every time the teaching was over, he would shyly say, "Goodbye, teacher." I like James. Even I treat him like my own son. But I'm really short of money. I want to buy a car. Peter, James, Dad, and I discussed selling Lisa and splitting the money. Oh, by the way, to be more precise, Peter is James' stepfather. Actually, I had the idea of selling Lisa a long time ago, but I haven't mentioned it to Peter. I don't want to expose my greed too early. I see Peter at least twice a week, almost always at his house. Peter's wife, Lisa, she's a slut. Whether it's weekdays or weekends, she's never home during the day, always out with other men. One day, I said to Peter, "Let's sell Lisa." I said, I contacted a human trafficker. It took a lot of effort. She's doing a big business. She's a businessman. He gives money to people, and he charges children and beautiful women who have read books. He pays the most. Peter didn't understand what I meant at first, and asked, "Why are you tossing about this?" I smiled and picked his chin, and said the desire deep in his heart. "You hate Lisa very much, right? But you always wanted to get Lisa's house, so you've been holding back and not getting along with Lisa. Divorce, isn't it?" Peter understood. "You mean sell Lisa to a human trafficker? What are you reluctant?" Peter was silent for a full 30 seconds and said, "If she is sold, her life will be over." Money. I sat up and frowned at Peter. Don't you want money? And not just money, but a lot of leisure. When the time comes, Lisa will be sold and disappeared. You will be Jane's only stepfather. And if you don't have a wife, you are still a victim. Peter lit a cigarette and looked at me. You should know what kind of person Lisa is. I tried my best to persuade him. This town is so small. A friend of mine's cousins, one of her boyfriends, she made so much money from doing dirty work for, and now she has a bad relationship with you. She won't give you a cent. Don't you feel wronged? Didn't you feel awkward in your life? Peter still looked at me and didn't speak. Peter, we've been together for more than half a year. I became a little anxious. Our relationship, do you want it or not? Think about it. After selling Lisa, the two of us will get married. After the limelight passes, we will raise James together, and we will be very well off. How wonderful. Sheila. Peter's eyes finally softened. He sighed and said, "Baby, what should I do with you?" I leaned on his shoulder and said, coquettishly, "I'm all for us. I want us to live a good life after we are together. You know, it's getting harder and harder to make money these days, so we might as well take a risk and make a lot of money. But Lisa is a very smart person. You also said, not in a good relationship. It is harder to deceive her than you think." Peter took a puff of cigarette and expressed his concern. I smiled for Lisa. The most important thing is not you nor her boyfriends, but her son James. Peter looked up at me. "James," I said excitedly, "I want Lisa to think that she is the one who set it up. Only if she regards herself as a hunter can she become a real prey." Peter's eyes widened. "You mean kidnapping James and threatening her?" "That's too risky. As long as we use our brains more, we can avoid a lot of troublesome steps. Listen to me." So I told Peter the plan I had been thinking about for a long time. I asked Peter to accidentally tell Lisa my plan to sell James. Then Lisa will be furious and may even confront me directly. I can't let her hide James, but I have to guide her. Let her plan. Let her think that it is me who will be sold, that I walked into the trap of their husband and wife. After the incident, Peter and I would have Lisa's son, occupy Lisa's house, and form a new family. I believe it will be a happy family. And Lisa's second half of her life will only be left with violence, darkness, and endless pain. After I finished the plan, Peter had finished his second cigarette. He looked at me and slowly blew a smoke ring at my face. He said, "You are such a scary person." Peter is a capable master. He asked for the contact information of the man with the flower arm and helped me negotiate a lot of things. He said he even talked to the flower arm man about future business collaborations. I was happy with my choice. Peter is a trustworthy person, but it's a pity that Lisa doesn't have the vision or the blessing. Beach. Lisa was going crazy scolding me, but I was too lazy to look at her, and I didn't want to argue with her anymore. A dying woman, let me pity her and satisfy her appetite. Alas, Lisa, you have done too many dirty things before, and you will have to experience countless men in the future. This is your retribution. Thinking about it, I couldn't help laughing. She won. You won. She amid tag chords. I laughed so hard that I couldn't straighten up. He slapped me so many times. You are amazing. Lisa kept crying, scolded me, and began to scold traffickers for not keeping their promises. Finally, she cried again, begging the traffickers to let her go. I paid no attention to Lisa, but looked up at James with a smile. The little boy still had his hands in his pockets, his head down, neither crying nor fussing, and he didn't even look at his mother and me. I called him with a smile, James. James, call me Mom in the future. I will be your mother. James moved his lips, but said nothing. The success of the plan filled my heart with pride. At this moment I was already laughing to tears, but I can't wipe it with my hands for now. Okay, bro, you're really dedicated. You've done a full set of acting. I said to the flower-armed man, can you untee it now? The flower-armed man still had the same expression, looking at me with a half smile. 3 seconds later, the smile on my face disappeared. Not right. The flower-armed man shouldn't look at me with that kind of look, that kind of pitiful mocking look at the victim. Then I heard Lisa's laughter. The laughter grew louder and louder. She was laughing, but there were tears in her eyes. You put yourself in it after all the calculations with me. Lisa looked at me as if she was looking at her own kind, with a half smile, but not a smile. How can I forget this? How can I forget that everyone in this world can be trusted, but you can't trust? You can't trust. Suddenly, there were footsteps at the door. Then, there were 3 long and 3 short knocks on the door, a total of 6 times. The flower-armed man went up to open the door almost obsequiously. It was James' stepfather, Lisa's husband, my lover, Peter. He was holding a cigarette. His eyes swept over the 2 of us, women, the 2 poor women he was playing with, and said, with a wicked smile, 2 chairs, no more, no less. Oh, Peter, you can do it. The women you sent are more beautiful than each other. The flower-armed man pushed Peter with a smile, his eyes full of lust. That's amused. There will be more opportunities for cooperation in the future, and beauties are not easy to find. Peter still looked at us with a smile. He's a very handsome man. Even though he is nearly 40 years old, he is still very charming. Even at this moment, I can't help but be dumbfounded. This is why Lisa married him back then. Why did I fall in love with him wholeheartedly? Why were we all deceived by him to death? I bit my lip hard, trying not to let the tears fall. I played my own little abacus. I was so stupid, so self-righteous. Yeah. Lost. I lost to him. From the moment I tried every means to contact the traffickers, to sell Lisa, from the moment I confided everything to him, I already lost. Peter overrides all this conspiracy. As long as he gets in touch with the traffickers, he can already control the overall situation. Me, just the one who knows the most in his conspiracy. That day in bed, when I told him my plan, he looked into my eyes for so long. He wasn't hesitating. He wasn't petting Lisa. He wasn't worried about James' safety. And he wasn't marveling at my insidious cruelty. He's booing his own plan. He made Lisa think she was selling me, and made me think she was selling Lisa. But both of us will be sold by him. He gets paid twice by himself. She is not bad-looking, and has a lot of masculine charm, so he can find more beautiful women. He was a scary person. However, old Peter, this kid is not your own. He looks good. He's still a boy. You just give it to me anyway. I have enough money today. The flower-armed man said from the cabinet. He threw out another package. Peter shook his head, threw the cigarette on the ground, and stomped on it a few times and said, his grandfather is the former director of the Public Security Bureau. He has some connections. I can use it. Besides, I should have a son too. It's troublesome to get married and have another one. I blurted out, are you talking human? No one paid any attention to me. Lisa has calmed down. Her eyes were obscure. I couldn't understand. James, didn't say a word the whole time. But at this moment, he suddenly took a few steps forward and walked to Peter's side. I thought he would have some kind of drastic reaction, but he just lowered his head, put one hand in his pocket, raised the other, and took Peter's hand. "Dad, let's go home. My name is James. 6 years old this year." That's what all adults say. "Well, a very good boy." I learned almost all of sensible when I was younger. I will take the initiative to get slippers for guests when they come. I would help my dad to the bathroom when he was drunk, stand on tiptoe, and pat him on the back. I'm going to buy a photo frame from the supermarket downstairs, framed a photo of our family of 3 when I was born, and put it on the bedside table of my parents. But Mom and Dad are divorced. My sensibleness didn't seem to matter to them. I started to dislike my mother. She is a scary person. She would let me learn the piano that I don't like. If I couldn't practice a piece well in a day, she wouldn't let me eat. She would ignore me all day because I didn't get a perfect score on my English oral exam in bilingual kindergarten. She would tell me countless times a day that I must be a promising person when I grow up, so that I will not let her down. She never hit me or scolded me, but I still didn't like her. Many years later, I learned that this is called cold violence. But it's a little too far to talk about many years later. After all, my childhood was so sad that I could talk about it for a lifetime. Actually, the saddest thing starts with a voice recorder. During the Spring Festival of 2003, my grandfather, who suddenly retired, gave me a New Year's gift, a voice recorder. At that time, a voice recorder cost at least 1,000 Yofen. It was a huge concept to me. Even there's no voice recorder for sale in our county. Grandpa had someone buy it in London. So I was happy for a whole week after receiving that voice recorder. I carry it with me almost all the time. Until one day I was reading in my stepfather and mother's room, and I dropped the recorder into the crack of the bed. I didn't realize I had lost it at first. I didn't find it in the crack of the bed until I came home from school the next day. In the evening, I clicked on the recording that had been recorded all day by accident. My face flushed as I listened to the voices. It was the voice of my art teacher. Her voice was low and elegant, and I recognized it immediately. The things she said on the bed of my mother and stepfather, I will never be able to say in my life. Since then, I often put the voice recorder in the crack of the bed, and several times a month, I would hear the teacher's voice. Every time in class, I would secretly look at her with disdain. But she didn't notice it once. She must be in love with my stepfather. Alas, how stupid she is. One day, I heard this conversation on the recorder. I contacted a human trafficker. It took a lot of effort. He's doing a big business. He's a businessman. He gives money to people. He charges children and beautiful women. You was a scary person. I heard the whole conversation between stepfather and teacher. I understand too. They're going to sell my mother. I stared at the dark ceiling that night and didn't sleep a wink. Adults are really stupid. I hate every one of them. I want to leave here. That day, the teacher took me on a long car ride. Looking at the red flowers outside the car window, I asked her teacher, "Is the world dark or bright?" What I really meant was, will the traffickers disappear? Will you terrible and disgusting adults disappear? The teacher smiled gently and told me it's evil and dark. I get it. Traffickers will not disappear. These disgusting adults will always exist. I didn't say anything extra that day. I kept my right hand in my pocket. In my pocket is the voice recorder that changed my destiny. The farce ended with the arrival of my stepfather. Actually, I wanted to escape every second I was here. But I had to stay for a reason. James said goodbye to mom and teacher. Stepfather took me, touched my head with a smile and said, I kept my mouth shut and refused to speak. I hate them. They don't deserve it. No one really loved me. From the moment I was born, what I faced was an indifferent world. What the fairy tale books say is forever a fairy tale. Stepfather, as a victor, took the money, took me, and left behind 2 beautiful burdens. He let me get into his car. I don't like him. Even though he looks good, the blood in his bones is dirty and he is cowardly. Otherwise, why did he even drive my mother's car and live in my mother's house? To be precise, it was my mother who bought the car, but from now on, it will be his. It was already dark, and there was a light in the distance. We drove towards the light. The stepfather smiled and said to me, James, you can choose your mother. You can choose the most beautiful mother in the world. He looked at me from the rearview mirror. He had a smile in his eyes, as if he had the confidence to charm any woman in the world. I looked at him and smiled quietly. He stared at my smile, stunned for a moment. The next second, he slammed on the brakes. My head hit the front seat, but it didn't hurt. What's ahead? Stepfather asked, looking at the flickering light in the distance with a frightened expression. I finally grinned. Dad, it's a police car. Then came chaos, chaos, and chaos. Stepfather wants to escape. He ran and ran, crushing I don't know how many rapeseed flowers. But he, along with the White House, was already surrounded by police cars. Finally, he crashed into a police car that was blocking his way, not hard. He was so cowardly that even when the police chased him, he still valued his life very much and didn't drive fast. A man slowly stepped out of the police car that stopped him. It was a stocky man, not wearing a police uniform. He got out of the car and his eyes narrowed. He is the one who overrides all conspiracies, my grandfather. Happy New Year, Grandpa. On New Year's Eve of 2022, I carried a bunch of New Year's goods and went to my grandfather's house with my wife. My grandfather is already in his 80s, still as chubby as ever, but he has always been in good health. He takes a walk and plays with walnuts every day. Not only is he in good health, but his mind is also very clear. He stroked his gray hair vigorously, helped me carry the New Year's goods to the corner, and put them away. Plain gold. He looked at the gift and grinned, his mouth full of dentures. This is good stuff. He muttered while placing it. When your grandma was here, she watched the advertisement on TV and kept clamoring for it, but I thought it was too expensive and never bought it for her. Now it's all right. I'll taste it for her. Grandpa cooked me a table of dishes. The nanny went home for the new year, so he cooked all the dishes by himself, and they were delicious. He was so happy that he drank a little wine, and his face turned red quickly. He looked at my wife and I, and he was so happy. You two, you are both glorious people's policemen of our common people. That's great. That's great. My life is complete. Every time Grandpa would express his appreciation for my career. My wife is a quiet girl with a tragic childhood. She was trafficked when she was a child, and it took 7 years for her family to find her. The first time she told me about her experience, I made up my mind to take care of her and make up for what the world owed her. "Are you still in touch with your mother?" Grandpa asked me out of the blue. After so many years, he asked me this question for the first time. I only saw her once after she got out of prison. That day she was carrying big bags and small bags of luggage and was about to go to the train station. I asked her where she was going. She said, in such a calm tone, "Go to bed, never come back." I saw relief in her eyes. "Grandpa, I have always had a question." I looked at my grandfather's drunk face and slowly uttered a few words. Grandpa didn't answer, but seemed to know what I was going to ask. Why did you have to put my mother in jail back then?" "She is your only daughter." That year, my grandfather, the director of the local public security bureau, suddenly retired early. He gave up his original pension and made this act that no one understood. Then he gave me the voice recorder. He touched my head and said, "James, if you hear your mother talking about work, record it." Work. Looking at the expensive and beautiful voice recorder, I have nothing to promise my grandfather. I have always been an obedient child, and I said excitedly at that time, guaranteed to complete the task. Every time my mother talked on the phone or talked about work with my stepfather, I would secretly put my hand into my trouser pocket and record it. I would go to my grandfather's house every Sunday as usual, but the voice recorder became a secret between the two of us. Every time my grandfather finished listening to my recordings, he would show a satisfied smile. He would touch my head and tell me, "You have a good mother who knows her mistakes and can correct them." But after he retired, he never had any contact with his mother. My mother never mentioned my grandfather at home, and she stopped seeing me every Sunday when I went to my grandfather's house. Until I recorded the conspiracy between the stepfather and the teacher, and the conspiracy between the stepfather and the mother. Of course, I deleted all the things about the stepfather and the teacher that my grandfather shouldn't hear. The following is the conversation between stepfather and mother. "What she wants to sell, James." "This bitch. I'll go right away." He said, "Don't worry, I have a good idea. Not only can we get rid of that woman, but we can also make a lot of money. After we get the money, we can split it equally. How about it?" How to earn James isn't sell that woman. I regard James as my own son. How could I let him be hurt? How to sell. That day, my grandfather trembled with anger when he heard this. I have never seen my grandfather so angry. After listening, he said, "Your mother is a cheap girl who doesn't know how to repent. Your grandmother and I have never given birth to such a daughter." After that, he used his years of prestige and connections to find a group of policemen. From the very beginning, it wasn't just the 3 traffickers in the house who were staring at the teacher and me entering the White House, but also a few plainclothes policemen hiding in the rapeseed field. Grandpa still don't understand what exactly did my mother do before. The rosy smile on my grandfather's face disappeared. He sighed and finally said, "I have been a policeman for half my life. I have always been a good policeman. I have always been a good policeman until my only daughter committed a crime." The following is the grandfather's own statement. "That day, I went on a mission myself and took a group of plainclothes policemen to arrest all the people in a den of child trafficking in the suburbs. We had been preparing for the operation for a long time, so we quickly and silently arrested everyone in the compound. Each of us was holding a human trafficker. That day, I thought I had wiped away a haze for this town, and I couldn't help but want to cheer and jump for joy as I escorted the struggling man in full clothes. I finally accomplished a daunting task before I retired. But in that dimly lit corridor, I saw my daughter, Lisa, walking towards me, holding a baby girl in her arms. Our eyes met, and I could see the fear in her eyes. She even opened her mouth wide. It was a bolt from the blue for me at that moment, but subconsciously, as a father, I made a choice instantly. I was so afraid that she would turn her head and run away, arousing suspicion. So I shouted, "Irrelevant people, get out of the way. Don't interfere with the police handling the case. Go into the courtyard." Fortunately, Lisa is harmless and smart enough. She nodded to us and then walked forward as if nothing had happened, as if she were the girl's mother. In the past, everyone in the police station said that I had a pair of piercing eyes, and I could tell whether a person was a criminal just by his appearance. But at that time, I let my daughter go. I let my daughter, the human trafficker I gave birth to, escape from under my nose. That was the only failure in my police career. I'm sorry for my badge and my position. I never thought that my daughter was also involved in the group that I had been fighting against for most of my life. I was devastated and retired early. My daughter assured me that she would never hurt anyone again. I sighed and didn't contact her again. It's just that I can't let go of my only grandson. I don't want him to be like his mother. I swear to God, if my daughter makes another mistake, I will not hesitate to bring justice to her. In order to catch them all, I had to put my grandson at risk and experience their plans. That voice recorder recorded everything, and none of them could escape. But my daughter looked at me one last time when she was arrested. I will never forget that look in her eyes. I will never forget that look in her eyes. It was actually a look of gratitude. It was as if she was telling me that after so many years, she could finally get a good night's sleep. Grandpa passed away a few years later, very suddenly and peacefully. He died in his sleep. It's just that I kept one thing from him until he died. Actually, I didn't let him finish that recording that day. So that woman. James I regard him as my own son. How could I let him be hurt? Peter said. How to settle? Lisa asked. I discussed with the traffickers in advance to let them tie her up and let our son go. Are you sure they'll let him go? They are businessmen. Do they want to turn back business? Don't worry, I already have a perfect plan. I have no objection to selling that woman. Then tell me what to do. I only let Grandpa hear this that day. But their conversation continues. At that time, let her take James there and make sure to enter their room so that she will not run away. Then we will go to pick up James. Don't worry, I will earn a lot of money then. Lisa hesitated for a moment, then slapped the bed suddenly and said, I disagree. You put my son at risk and go to the traffickers, done just for a little money. I firmly disagree. They argued for a while. Lisa was very determined and she disagreed with the plan. Peter had to give up. The 6-year-old me lay in bed that night. Thought about it for a night. The next day I went to my mother. I told her that I knew everything because I had a voice recorder and I knew her and Peter's plan. Of course, I wouldn't tell her about the higher level plans of the teacher and stepfather. If I told her, none of this would have happened. Don't worry about me. When the time comes, I will bring a knife. If they really want to tie me up, I will threaten them with death. Not only will they not get a penny, but they will also lose their lives. They will not do business at a loss. Besides, they are businessmen. You have to trust Peter. The traffickers will definitely let me go, I said to my mother. Mom looked at me like I was a monster. Mom, I want you to make money. I want you to buy me a toy car. I forced a childish smile. And I want you to go to jail. Because of my persuasion at night, my mother agreed to Peter's plan. Mom didn't really want to go that day, and she didn't refuse to repent. She would change her mind just because of me. I kept this from my grandfather until his death. Grandpa, I'm sorry. That day, I had my hands in my pockets. Right hand holding the voice recorder, left hand holding a knife. I only told my wife the most real and complete truth. I told her after my grandfather died. I've been holding it in for too many years, and my grandfather's death made me feel relieved. I was on my way to accompany my wife for a pregnancy checker. My mother, father, stepfather, teacher, grandfather, and grandmother are all gone. I only have my wife and the child in her womb. I held back for a long time. I could only tell her. Because the first time I saw her eyes many years ago, I knew that she was the same kind of person as me. After hearing this, my wife smiled, looking up. Then she slowly turned her head, looked at my profile, and said, "James, you are such a scary person. Since I was a child, I have been wondering whether the world is dark or bright. The art teacher told me that the world is evil and dark. But now I have grown up. I have my own ability to think independently. If I could go back in time, I would say to myself that the world is bright and that it is the people with evil hearts who are dark. I am very lucky to have become a people's policeman when I grow up. I want to make this world brighter and brighter,